Good day, lords and ladies, and welcome back to Hard West with me, Cornish-knight, as we do our review of the game. I tend to do these after doing the full Let's Plays for them, so here we go. The first thing we're going to cover is going to be plot, and then we'll look at gameplay, and then we'll look at game mechanics. So first off, we'll look at the plot for the main game, which is all based around getting revenge, or at least trying to liberate your dead wife's soul. To be honest, it's not particularly fantastic. I mean, it's not a bad plot. The main plot in Hard West is okay. It's not anything fantastic. It's no Dragon Age Origins or Mass Effect levels of complicated. It's rather straightforward, and about a third of the way through the main story you can pretty much gauge how it's going to end. That being said, it's not bad. A lot of the characters are interesting. I won't say it's like the strongest element of the game. I mean, it's a good solid plot, something along the lines of that you would find in a number of D&D campaigns, other games like that. I know there is a setting like I think it's there's a particular setting in D&D, well, offshoot of D&D, where you basically play in a grim, dark fantasy western setting. I can't remember what it's called now, but it's similar to that. I mean, they could have done a bit more with the plot, to be honest. It's not anything, as I said, outlandish, given the setting, of course, but it could be worse. I did like the side stories where you played other people, like you played the Inquisitor, and then you played played the clairvoyants and bits and pieces. I liked that side. Oh, sorry, no, you played the Masked Man, the Inquisitor, and a bunch of other people. I enjoyed that a lot. I thought that was a very nice thing. Gave you a bit more depth and like flussed out some of the side characters. I will say that the ending for the main game, did not. It was okay. I went back and played and found out the other ending, and there wasn't very much variety to it. It was just, one of them was, oh, the world is saved if you kill the main character with his father, and the other one is, oh, the world is doomed if you don't. So there wasn't much closure, I suppose. It didn't feel like a compelling ending. It was very much, oh, this is how I thought it was going to end, and this is how it did. That being said, it's not a bad story. I mean, I've played games that have had worse stories, to be honest. But I did think they could have done a lot more with it. They could have been a lot more nuanced, and it would have been nice to get an ending where the main character that you've played for most of the game doesn't get sucked into hell, no matter the outcome. I would have liked that to a certain extent. I wish there would have been a way that you could have done that. On to the Scars of Freedom DLC, the plot in that. I like the plot in that a lot more. I like the mechanic between Gorman and Liberty, the two main characters that you switch backwards and forwards between. My only complaint is that it wasn't flussed out enough. The backstory, the stories for them felt very rushed to a certain extent, and I think they could have had the DLC be a bit longer, just to give a bit more filling of character. But besides that, it was a good story. I liked the whole Dr. Frankenstein and the masked doctors and all that kind of stuff, and all that story that was linked into it. I'm a very big fan of the whole Frankenstein mythos and all that kind of stuff.
I was ecstatic. I knew you had embraced your superhuman potential.
But as I said, they could have done a bit more with it. I felt it was a bit lackluster.
I knew then you had feelings for
but still much better than, in some ways, much better than the main plot and the main game. Now, on to gameplay. The gameplay is pretty much identical in both the DLC and the main game. I did find myself turning on a number of the other additional features, like enemies have more abilities and stuff like that. And even then, it wasn't particularly hard. There were instances where I had issues, but that was more due to my own stupidity or the game having problems rather than actual difficulty per se. I suppose I could have put it up to hard, but I find in a lot of times all that does is add more health and give more damage rather than increasing the enemies in actual tactical ability. I was never been a fan of bullet sponges in games. I mean, to be honest, the gameplay is very solid. Item management, weapon management, abilities in the first game where you have the different kinds of cards, and then you shift over to basically what looks like body part management in the DLC. To be honest, I liked the body management version of it a lot more than the card version that you had in the vanilla game. My only downside is that the way they structured the DLC made it very hard. Unless you wrote down the recipes outside of the game, it made it very hard to remember what you needed to get these combinations going. These particular higher evolved combinations of flesh golems, basically, for a greater or lesser term.
I first suspected your grudge against me.
It just felt a bit wasted. They could have done a lot more with it, I thought. It just, especially since you jumped backwards and forwards in the DLC between narratives of each two of the main characters, it meant that the game felt very disjointed when it came to item management. You found that you had to start getting stuff all over again, and by the time I got to the final battle, I didn't have a clue what some people even had equipped, especially on the other party. It was a bit unfortunate. Now, in the main standalone game, the gameplay could do with tweaking. I found that a lot of the cards became very similar, especially the fact that some of the other cards of the same suit tend to have the same ability, which would be nice if each card had a different thing, or at least was different. I suppose they were different enough that they had different abilities and stat. They had different abilities even if the stat buffs remained the same. But I don't know. I liked the DLC way they approached it, that you had consequences and benefits of building things particularly in a particular way. I did like that a lot, and I wish they'd implemented that into the main game. You had a lot of really interesting and wacky weapons. I will admit, though, that very quickly a lot of them just never got used, because from my experience it was better to have guns that did more damage than it was to have guns that had massive magazines. So I never saw the point of them. I suppose there were certain weapons which had large magazines which you could flurry, which is quick-shot it, which may have been better in some ways, but I found myself relying on a lot of the very similar weapons from both the main game and the DLC content. You always wanted to get the Navy revolver, you always wanted to get one of either the elephant rifle or the scoped custom rifle. There wasn't a lot of variation. I mean, to be honest, I used a lot more of the different weapons in the DLC than I ever did in the main standalone game. But besides that, the gameplay is solid. Don't get me wrong. The gameplay in Hard West, in both in the DLC and in the standalone game, are solid. I mean, they're nothing extraordinary. I like the setting. I like the look of the gameplay. I like the feel of it. It's good. There's nothing really to be complaining about it. If I was going to say anything, it could have done with more polish in some ways. Maybe polishing up the enemy AI and the NPC AI would be useful as well. But besides that, not a lot. It was more story than anything I think failed this game in some regards. The actual gameplay is really solid. A really good, solid, all-around turn-based tactics game, but it really did need to have a bit more polish done in some other areas, which gets us on to the third area of the game, which is game mechanics. Game-wise, I like the look of the game. The graphics good. It runs relatively well, even on older PCs. as I said, the gameplay AI could do with a bit of a tweak. The AI does have a habit of just charging out into the open a lot. As you can see here, they tend to do a lot of bull rushes, especially if they've got large groups of people, which I'm not a massive fan of it. It's especially on like medium difficulty. It meant the game was very, very easy in some regard. And you can see straight away what happens if you kill like a couple of them. The AI sifts track and then will literally pull people back to defend because they suddenly realise they don't have the strength anymore. Which is a bit annoying because the AI can get in loops a lot. I don't know. It's especially also unless for my own misgivings, because I always had the use additional abilities turned on. The enemy would, if I'm pretty much under the assumption, the enemy wouldn't use a lot of abilities in the vanilla version of the game, which is a shame because the abilities are one of the few things that actually put your party members at the risk a lot of the time. I do like the luck mechanic. The luck mechanic was very nice. It gives you a bit more control over the RNG, but at the same time, I did have stuff turned on that meant that you got luck back every time you killed something. Because from my experience of playing the game, the vanilla base game with nothing turned on, luck was a much more uncommon resource, to the extent where it was a lot easier to die, to be honest. It was a lot easier to die, it was a lot easier to lose people, and it was a lot harder to use abilities. Though, to be honest, you didn't get much experience from killing people. You got like 10 experience, which isn't very much when you consider even missing someone doesn't will take away even if you have like a really small percentage chance of hitting someone and you miss, you still take away a good chunk of their luck. So I like the luck mechanic in this game. It worked well with the rest of the game mechanics itself. I like the look of the world from like a gameplay and game mechanic system. There was a lot of cover. The worlds were always interesting, especially when you shifted between the normal world in the main game and like the corrupted demonic world. That was very nice as well. I don't have much to complain, in all honesty, about the gameplay. The game mechanics, I should say. They were very solid, nothing out of the ordinary per se. They had a very XCOM, like the modern reworking of XCOM feel to them. Solid. It was a good solid round game. I have said this before, the actual game mechanics and gameplay of this game are solid. I have issues with it. I think they could have made a lot of the weapons a lot more varied so you had more uses for them. And as I said, the luck mechanic is interesting, though it does heavily skew the game if you don't have certain things turned on for it. I will say that the AI would need work. If they were going to remake this game, they would have to rework the artificial intelligence for the enemies because it is sorely lacking. It's just one of these things. I mean, gameplay-wise, both gameplay and game mechanic-wise, the game is solid. The game has no issues, from what I can see, besides petty things. I will say that recording it on my old PC, it did struggle with having that and recording software on it. Didn't like it. So it might be better if the game had been optimized a bit more. Also, I do find the game in recordings looks a bit dark. That's from like a recording perspective, nothing more. So, to summarise, how do I feel about Hard West? I think Hard West is a very good game. The main area which it's let down on is its story, unfortunately. It's not a bad story, it's just not a great story. It's a very, I suppose, you could use the term B-listed story. It's very, it's not uninspired, but actually uninspired would probably be a term you could use for it, I suppose. More like unoriginal, is probably more appropriate. It's it's very by the books. Out for revenge for bloke's dead wife, and he's going to damn himself in the process. Which, if you know anything about the sort of fantasy like D&D setting or the fantasy Western RP setting that this seems to have been heavily inspired by in some regards. I don't know if it was, but it definitely strikes me as having that feeling of that particular role-playing setting. It's not anything unusual, so it would have been nice to have a bit more unexpectedness. It was very obvious in the beginning who the bad guys were, who this was, who that was. So I think if the story had been better, the game would have felt better overall, because it's the one thing that lets the game down a lot is the story, in my honest opinion. I find the story let it...
I spotted fire.
Sorry, I react to the stuff going on in the game. I find that the main story let the game down a lot. The main gameplay itself wasn't too bad. I liked the gameplay, I liked the battles. I found all this stuff really ingenious, and the ability uses and stuff like that were very fun. Though I did find myself gravitating to some particular abilities more than others. I didn't see, for example, like the tracking ability that you can get from some of the items and cards to be useful at all. Like the cannibal ability, I suspect that a lot of the abilities, especially the ones that you don't use in the normal settings, would become more useful on the harder difficulty. But besides that, the main gameplay isn't bad. It's just the actual story elements let it down a tad. I definitely got the feeling that it would have been better if the story had a bit more substance to it, and a little bit less predictability in some ways. But I had a lot of fun. I like Hard West. I think it's a good game. To be honest, it's not as good as, say, the XCOM series, like from a mechanical standpoint. But the XCOM series has been around a long time, so they've had a lot of practice to refine it. I really wish that they would redo that. If they were good, they would do another Hard West, because I love the setting. I love this whole grim, dark fantasy western with demons and monsters, and I love that particular RP setting that I can never remember the name of. And it'd be so good. It'd be so rare to have a game like this come out nowadays. A game which is its own unique IP. So it would be really nice to have something like this done again, a bit more polish, a bit more money put into it, and I think it would be a really good title. I mean, this is a good title anyway. I would recommend Hard West to people, even if not for a story reason, just purely for game mechanic. The battles are fun, the party management is interesting. I will say the DLC is harder than the main game on normal, but I really want to see this game redone, like to do like a Hard West 2 or something. Like I would love it. Like the people who do the Wasteland series. I mean, I like the Wasteland, and they're releasing a new one. I'd love to see them maybe take this game on, like take this IP on, and remake it. That would be really, really cool. Or another developer comes along and picks this up and turns it and like makes a remake or a sequel to it. I would really love to see this game remade, like either have a remake or a sequel or a follow-up to it, or just have something set in the same kind of setting, like a fantasy Wild West setting with demons and monsters. Just this time period is so rich for it. It suits it so well. I love the period. I love like the background information that you have for the game. This is something I sort of touched on probably, is the background information you have for the game, all the stuff that's going on in it is really fascinating from a player's perspective. It's a shame they don't go into it as much in the actual game itself. They cover it barely, but it's just, the lore is so rich and the characters are colourful and interesting. It's just a shame that it just doesn't get exploited. The amount of lore and potential that could be used in the story was so rich. You could have had so many options. You could have had like good versus evil, you could have had like angels descending to fight the devil, and you had to choose a side, or you could have tried to screw both parties, or stuff like that. Just made the dynamic more chaotic rather than just going, okay, you're the main characters working for the devil. It's really obvious from early on that this guy's the devil. What do you want to do? And it's like you either side with the bad guy, which is your main character, or right at the end you switch over to the bloke that put you in this position all along, which is your father, and you kill your son. Now, the game has so much potential. I really do think they should really rework it. But to conclude then, I suppose, I really do think the game is a good game, though it's not an outstanding game compared to, say, like Wastelands 2 or some of the other games I've played over the years. I do think it's well worth looking it up for the price that it's at on Steam at the moment, which I don't think it will be that much. It's definitely a good game. So to conclude, if you like turn-based strategy, if you like party management, if you like games like XCOM but you don't want to have the sci-fi setting, then I do suggest that you play Hard West.
But has anyone?
Especially if it's on sale. It's definitely a game I would pick up on sale. It's one of those titles I've just missed out on, and given a bit of love, I think it could have become something great. But that's all, folks. I think this has been my review of Hard West and the Scars of Freedom DLC. I've been Cornish-knight, this has been the Hard West, and I shall see you all next time on the next Let's Play series. Goodbye, folks.